What happens when a billionaire disguises himself as a janitor to expose corruption in his own hotel? Can one undercover shift change the fate of an entire staff and bring justice to those who were mistreated? How do you truly measure a leader? By their power or by how they treat the people who work for them? The restaurant inside the luxury hotel was buzzing. Guests in expensive suits sipped on their drinks, waiters moved swiftly between tables, and soft jazz played in the background. Everything seemed perfect, but Shaquille O'Neal could feel something was off. Sitting in the corner, his massive frame barely fitting into the chair, he casually sipped his water. His presence alone turned heads, but tonight, he wasn't here as a celebrity. He was here as an observer. A hushed conversation at the bar caught his attention. Two employees, voices low, faces tense. Shaq leaned in slightly, pretending to check his phone. Carter snapped at Luis again today, called him slow and useless in front of guests. Man's a tyrant, and don't even think about asking for overtime pay. Shaq's jaw tightened. Mr. Carter, the hotel's general manager, a man who, according to corporate reports, had impeccable performance. But Shaq had heard whispers, employees terrified of speaking up, janitors being treated like second-class citizens, and housekeepers working extra hours without pay. And now, here was proof. Shaq set his glass down, exhaled slowly, and made up his mind. He was going undercover. Later that night, Shaq sat with his closest team members in his private office. "I need a disguise," he said, arms crossed. His assistant, Reggie, raised an eyebrow. "Big guy like you? Ain't no way you're blending in." Shaq grinned. "Oh, I'll blend in just fine." They got to work. A fake beard, thick and scruffy. A cap pulled low to hide his face. A janitor's uniform, baggy enough to make him look less like an NBA legend and more like a regular worker. The finishing touch? A fake name badge. Sam, maintenance staff. Looking in the mirror, Shaq barely recognized himself. Perfect. This wasn't a stunt. This wasn't about revenge. Shaq had been raised to respect everyone, especially the people who work behind the scenes. Janitors, housekeepers, dishwashers. They were the backbone of places like this. And if someone like Carter was treating them like garbage, Shaq needed to see it with his own eyes. Then, he'd handle it. The next morning, Shaq the janitor walked into the hotel. Nobody blinked. Nobody gasped. Nobody saw a basketball icon. All they saw was a new worker, mop in hand, ready to clean. And just like that, Shaq O'Neal disappeared. Sam, the janitor, had arrived. Shaq stepped through the back entrance of the hotel, dressed in his oversized janitor's uniform. His fake beard itched, and the cap sat low over his forehead, shadowing his face. No one looked twice at him. The morning shift had just begun, and workers were already rushing to their stations. Housekeepers pushing carts, maintenance workers fixing light fixtures, and janitors gathering their cleaning supplies. Shaq blended in perfectly. Today, he wasn't the basketball legend. He was just Sam, the new janitor. As Shaq made his way to the supply closet, he noticed an elderly man struggling to lift a mop bucket. "Need a hand?" Shaq asked, keeping his voice lower than usual. The man looked up and sighed. "I've been lifting these things for 15 years, son. My back ain't what it used to be." Shaq gently took the bucket. "Then today I got it." The man gave a tired smile. "Name's Luis. Welcome to the hardest job in this hotel." Before Shaq could respond, a sharp voice cut through the hallway. "What are you two standing around for?" Shaq turned to see Mr. Carter, the general manager, marching toward them with a scowl. Luis straightened immediately, eyes down. Shaq just watched, silently studying the man. Carter was average height but carried himself like a king. His expensive watch gleamed as he pointed a finger at Luis. "I don't pay you to chat. I pay you to work." Luis nodded quickly, grabbing his mop. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." Shaq clenched his jaw but said nothing. He could feel Carter's cold gaze shift to him. "And you, new guy, what's your name?" "Sam," Shaq answered, keeping his voice steady. Carter snorted. "Well, Sam, if you want to keep this job, you better move faster. This isn't a charity." Then, without waiting for a response, Carter turned and walked off. Luis exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Shaq gripped the mop handle tightly. His first 5 minutes, and he already hated this man. As Shaq mopped the floors, Luis leaned over and whispered, "Stay out of Carter's way. He's got a habit of making people disappear." Shaq glanced at him. "Disappear?" Luis sighed. "He fires people for nothing. No warnings, no second chances. One wrong move, and you're out." A young housekeeper, Sophia, walked by and overheard. She stopped, lowering her voice. "He's right. Carter treats corporate guests like royalty, but treats workers like garbage." Shaq noted her nervous eyes, constantly checking if someone was listening. She leaned in. Just do your job, don't talk back, and bang! They all flinched as the sound of a chair being slammed echoed from the restaurant. All eyes turned toward the source. Mr. Carter stood over an elderly dishwasher, his face twisted with anger. The dishwasher, a frail man in his 60s, had dropped a plate, shattering it. Carter's voice boomed across the room. Are you completely useless? How hard is it to wash dishes? The entire restaurant froze, customers watching in awkward silence. Shaq's fists curled into tight balls. This man was a bully. Luis looked down, whispering, "We're used to it." Shaq wasn't, but he stayed quiet. Not yet. He needed to see more. For now, he kept mopping. But inside, he was already planning Carter's downfall. The hotel ran like a well-oiled machine. On the surface, guests walked through the grand lobby, admiring the chandeliers and polished floors. The front desk staff smiled, the restaurant servers moved swiftly, and the bellhops rushed to grab luggage. Everything seemed perfect, but only for those paying the bill. For the workers behind the scenes, it was a different world, and Shaq was about to see it firsthand. Shaq had been mopping the lobby floor for less than an hour when he noticed something strange. The front desk employees were treated with respect. Carter nodded at them, greeted them by name, and even laughed at their jokes. The janitors and housekeepers, they were invisible. Carter passed them like they didn't exist, except when he needed someone to yell at. A young housekeeper, probably in her early 20s, wheeled her cart through the hallway, carefully restocking towels. She moved too slow for Carter's liking. "Pick it up, Sophia. This isn't your grandma's house." His voice cut through the air like a whip. Sophia froze, her face burning with humiliation. Shaq stopped mopping. His fingers tightened around the handle. Carter didn't even wait for a response. He turned away, already looking for his next target. Sophia kept her head down and kept working. Shaq took a slow breath. Not yet. Minutes later, a well-dressed businessman checked out at the front desk. He smiled at the receptionist and slipped an envelope across the counter. "For the housekeeping staff," he said warmly. The receptionist nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'll make sure they get it." She placed the envelope on the counter. Before she could lock it away, Carter's hands shot out. Snatch! Shaq watched as Carter slid the envelope into his own pocket. No one said a word. Not the receptionist, not the bellhop. It was like this happened all the time. Shaq felt his pulse slowly rise. That was strike two. A sharp crash rang out from the hotel's restaurant. Shaq and Luis whipped their heads around toward the source. An elderly dishwasher stood frozen, staring at the floor. A plate lay shattered at his feet. The poor man's hands shook as he bent down to pick up the pieces. Then came Carter's roar. "Are you completely useless? How hard is it to wash dishes?" The dishwasher flinched. The entire restaurant fell silent. Customers turned in their seats, watching the scene unfold. The dishwasher stammered. I just... Carter didn't let him finish. "You're pathetic. Maybe it's time I hired someone who can actually do the job." Shaq's chest tightened. His grip on the mop handle turned his knuckles white. The dishwasher lowered his head. I'll work faster, sir." Carter smirked. "See that you do." And just like that, he walked away. Shaq inhaled slowly. His whole body burned with anger. During the evening staff break, Shaq sat down at a small table with the janitors and housekeepers. Luis rubbed his back with a sigh. 15 years here, and Carter still acts like I'm dirt. Shaq kept his voice casual. "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" Luis laughed bitterly. "Because we'd be fired before we finished our sentence." Sophia sat across from them, arms crossed. "We don't even get overtime pay." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "That's illegal." She nodded. "Carter makes us clock out at 8, but then tells us to finish a few more things. If we don't, we lose shifts the next week." Shaq felt his stomach turn. This wasn't just rudeness. This was exploitation. Just when Shaq thought Carter couldn't get any worse, he did. A janitor, probably no older than 19, walked into the supply closet for a drink of water. Carter caught him. "Break time?" Carter sneered. The young janitor's eyes widened. "Sir, I was just..." Carter cut him off. "You're fired." The kid froze. What? I said you're fired. Get out. Shaq saw the kid's face crumble. One mistake, one sip of water, and he lost his job. The rage inside Shaq exploded. Enough was enough. That night, as Shaq put away his mop, Luis shook his head. We all just keep our heads down, you know? Ain't no changing things. Shaq looked at him. Really looked at him. The man had given 15 years to this hotel, and this was how he was treated? Shaq rolled his shoulders and took a deep breath. Maybe, he said quietly, or maybe it's time someone did something about it. Shaq had seen enough. The way Carter humiliated people, stole from his own staff, and fired employees like they were disposable, it made his blood boil. But he knew anger wasn't enough. If he wanted to fix this, he had to earn the trust of the workers first. They had been mistreated for so long, they didn't believe change was possible. Shaq was about to change that. The next day, during the lunch break, Shaq grabbed a tray from the cafeteria and sat at a small, dented table in the back of the employee lounge. Luis sat across from him, eating slowly, his old hands trembling slightly as he picked at his food. Sophia and two other housekeepers sat nearby, whispering about their workload. Shaq took a bite of his sandwich. So, is this how every day goes? Luis chuckled bitterly. Pretty much, Sophia scoffed. You haven't even seen the worst of it yet. Shaq leaned in. Tell me. At first they hesitated. Then the floodgates opened. Luis sighed. Carter's been running this place like his personal kingdom for years. If he doesn't like you, you're out. No warnings. No explanations. One of the housekeepers, Maria, nodded. And if you do stay, he makes sure you suffer. He takes our tips, denies overtime, and cuts hours if we complain. Sophia shook her head, eyes full of frustration. Last week I had to work 3 extra hours, unpaid. Carter said if I clocked it, I'd lose my hours next week. What choice did I have? Shaq clenched his jaw. He already knew Carter was a monster, but hearing it directly from the workers, it hit different. Why doesn't anyone report him? Shaq asked. Luis gave him a tired look. To who? HR? They don't care. The guests? They don't see what happens behind closed doors. Carter owns the narrative. Shaq nodded slowly, but not for long. Shaq leaned forward. What if someone could do something about it? The workers laughed bitterly. Maria smirked. Unless you've got a magic wand, Sam, there's no fixing this. Sophia added, even if we complain, Carter will just fire us. He always finds a way. Shaq thought for a moment. What if you had proof? Silence. Luis raised an eyebrow. Proof. Shaq nodded. What if Carter's own words, his threats, his lies were recorded? What if you could show the world exactly what he's doing? Maria frowned. Who would believe us? Shaq smiled slightly. Everyone. For the first time, hope flickered in their eyes. Shaq knew talk was cheap. He needed to prove to them that he wasn't just another guy with empty promises. That afternoon, Carter stormed into the kitchen barking orders. A young busboy, probably no older than 18, wiped sweat off his forehead as he hurried to stack dishes. He wasn't fast enough. Carter grabbed a plate and slammed it onto the counter. Move faster, or you're out of here. The boy flinched but nodded quickly. Shaq stepped forward. Hey, he's moving as fast as he can. The room went dead silent. Luis and the others stared at him like he'd just made a huge mistake. Carter turned slowly, eyes full of venom. What did you just say? Shaq held his ground. I said he's working hard. Maybe instead of screaming, you should appreciate that. Carter's nostrils flared. You don't tell me how to run my hotel, janitor. Shaq just smiled. Right. Your hotel, Carter sneered. Watch yourself, Sam. You're already on thin ice. Then just as suddenly as he appeared, he stormed off. As soon as he was gone, Luis grabbed Shaq's arm. Are you crazy? He'll fire you. Shaq shrugged. Then he fires me. Maria shook her head. You don't get it. Once Carter has a target, he makes your life miserable until you quit. Sophia crossed her arms. You're either stupid or fearless. Shaq grinned. A little of both. That night, as Shaq finished his shift, something changed. Luis walked up and clapped a hand on his shoulder. No one's ever stood up to Carter like that, he said. Not in years. Maria nodded. If you're really serious about this, Maybe we can help. Sophia sighed, glancing around like she was checking for spies. But if you're going after Carter, you better be smart about it. Shaq smirked. Oh, I plan to be. For the first time, they didn't see him as just another worker. They saw him as something more, someone who might actually change things. Shaq had seen enough. Now it was time to act. He had spent days watching Carter abuse his power, humiliate employees, and steal from his own staff. Now he needed proof. Real, undeniable, damning proof. Because once he had it, Carter's reign was over. That night, after the shift ended, Shaq met with Luis, Sophia, and Maria in the employee break room. The air was thick with tension. Luis leaned forward. Okay, big guy, what's the plan? Shaq pulled out a small, hidden camera. It was tiny, no bigger than a button. Sophia's eyes widened. Where did you get that? Shaq smirked. Let's just say I have connections. He placed the camera on the table. This records everything, audio and video. We plant a few around the hotel, and when Carter screws up, which he will, we'll have evidence. Maria looked skeptical. Even if we record him, what if no one listens? Shaq grinned. Oh, trust me. Once this gets out, people will listen. The next morning, Shaq arrived earlier than usual. He wore his janitor's uniform, but now it had 3 hidden cameras carefully placed, one on his cap, one on his mop bucket, and one disguised as a button on his shirt. Luis helped him position a small camera near the break room, where Carter loved to yell at staff. Sophia placed another one inside a cleaning cart, pointed toward the manager's office. Maria slipped one behind the front desk, aimed directly at the spot where Carter stole tips. It was all set. Now they just had to wait. It didn't take long. By noon, Carter was already on a rampage. A housekeeper spilled a tray of glasses in the restaurant. Carter exploded. Are you blind? Or just stupid? Shaq's camera caught everything. Later that afternoon, Carter cornered a nervous young bellhop. I need you to stay 2 extra hours tonight. The kid hesitated. Sir, I already worked overtime yesterday. Will this be paid? Carter laughed in his face. Oh, that's cute. You think you deserve overtime pay? The bellhop looked down. But that's the law. Carter smirked. Then go ahead. Sue me. Shaq's camera caught it all. By evening, Shaq had enough footage to bury Carter 10 times over. But he needed one last nail in the coffin. That's when he saw it. A wealthy hotel guest left an envelope at the front desk. For the housekeepers, the guest said kindly. Shaq didn't even have to guess what would happen next. Sure enough, as soon as the guest walked away, Carter strolled by. He spotted the envelope, and without hesitation, he took it. Shaq felt his pulse slow. Gotcha. That night, Shaq gathered his team. Luis, Sophia, Maria, and the others crowded around as he pulled out his phone. Shaq tapped the screen. The hidden camera footage started playing. Carter screaming, Carter stealing tips, Carter mocking employees for demanding their legal pay. The room fell silent. Then, laughter. Not because it was funny, but because, for the first time, Carter had no way out. Sophia grinned. That man is done. Luis chuckled. I wish I could see his face when he finds out. Shaq smirked. Oh, don't worry. You will. Because tomorrow he was going to expose Carter in front of the entire hotel. And this time, Carter wouldn't be the one giving orders. He'd be the one getting thrown out. The hotel lobby was buzzing with activity. Guests checked in, staff rushed around, and the scent of fresh coffee from the lounge filled the air. Shaq stood in the corner, pushing a mop back and forth, waiting, watching. Today was the day. Carter was about to face the consequences. A sleek black limousine pulled up outside. The doors swung open. Out stepped Victoria Langston, a powerful businesswoman and longtime investor in the hotel chain. Carter practically sprinted to the entrance, his fake charm on full display. Ms. Langston, he greeted, flashing his biggest corporate smile. Welcome to our hotel. We've prepared the presidential suite for you. She gave a polite nod. I expect nothing less. Carter gestured for the staff to hurry. Take her bags up immediately. Shaq watched the entire transformation. The same man who barked at janitors and housekeepers was now acting like the perfect host. But not for long. Shaq pushed his mop bucket closer. Then, he accidentally knocked it over. Dirty water splashed across the marble floor. Right at Carter's feet. For a second there was silence. Then Carter lost it. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he roared, his face turning red. The entire lobby froze. Shaq stayed calm. He bent down, grabbed his mop, and started wiping. "Sorry, sir," he said, keeping his voice low. "You idiot!" Carter shouted. "You can't even mop a floor?" Victoria Langston raised an eyebrow. "Does he always speak to employees like this?" Carter's face paled. He turned to her, stammering. No, Ms. Langston. This was just..." Shaq stood up slowly, and in one smooth motion, he removed his cap. Then, he peeled off the fake beard. The lobby fell silent. Carter's face turned ghost white. Shaq stared him down. "My hotel." Carter took a step back. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Shaq crossed his arms. "Go ahead, explain yourself." Sweat formed on Carter's forehead. "Mr. O'Neill, sir, I didn't know it was you." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "So if I wasn't me, it would have been okay?" Carter stammered. No, Shaq pulled out his phone. He pressed play. The hidden camera footage started rolling on full volume. Carter yelling at employees. Carter stealing tips. Carter mocking the workers. The entire lobby watched in horrified silence. A few guests gasped. Others shook their heads in disgust. Victoria Langston looked furious. "You've been running this hotel like a tyrant," Shaq said coldly, "and I have every second of it on video." Carter was sweating bullets now. I can't explain." Shaq's voice turned sharp. "You stole money. You abused your staff. You fired good people just because you could." Carter's eyes darted around the room. He was looking for a way out. There wasn't one. Luis stepped forward. His voice, usually quiet, was firm. "You treated us like garbage for years," he said. "You made our lives hell." Sophia crossed her arms. "And now? You're finally getting what you deserve." Maria smirked. "Karma's a beautiful thing." The other employees nodded. Some even clapped. Shaq turned back to Carter. "You don't deserve this job," he said. Carter panicked. "Mr. O'Neill, please, I can change. Give me another chance." Shaq just shook his head. "Security." Two security guards appeared behind Carter. "Escort him out," Shaq ordered. Carter freaked out. "You can't do this," he shouted, struggling. "I made this hotel run." Shaq smiled. "Number they did." He gestured toward the staff. Carter kept fighting. "I'll sue you. The security dragged him through the doors. The moment he was gone, the lobby erupted into cheers. Luis laughed. "Man, I never thought I'd see that day." Sophia grinned. "Best day ever." Maria wiped a tear. "Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, for everything." Shaq smiled. "You don't have to call me Mr. O'Neill." Sophia smirked. "Fine, big guy then." The staff laughed. For the first time in a long time, they felt free. Victoria Langston approached Shaq. "You handled that well," she said, nodding in approval. Shaq shrugged. "I just did what was right." She smiled. "And that's why I'll be investing more into this hotel. With you in charge, I know things will change." Shaq grinned. "Oh, you have no idea." That evening, Shaq gathered the staff in the break room. "I know things have been bad," he said, "but from this moment on, that's over." He looked at Luis. "You're getting a raise." Luis's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Shaq turned to Sophia. "You're being promoted to head of housekeeping." Sophia's jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" Maria covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Shaq smiled. "All of you deserve better. And starting today, you're gonna get it." The room erupted into cheers. The nightmare was finally over, and a new chapter was beginning. The next morning, Shaq walked through the lobby. Guests smiled at him. Employees greeted him with respect. And Carter? Nowhere to be seen. Shaq grabbed a mop. Luis raised an eyebrow. What are you doing?" Shaq grinned. "Mopping the floor, obviously." Sophia laughed. "You own the hotel, Shaq." Shaq smirked. "Yeah, but I never said I'd stop being a janitor." He mopped as the staff laughed. The hotel was finally in good hands. And Shaq? He was just getting started. The hotel doors slammed shut behind Carter as security dragged him outside. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control. He stumbled onto the sidewalk, still in his expensive suit. But suddenly, it didn't feel like power. It felt useless, helpless. Carter spun around, trying to push past the security guards. "You can't do this! I built this place!" he shouted, eyes wild with desperation. But the doors? They stayed locked. A few guests in the lobby watched through the glass. Some whispered, others smirked. Luis and Sophia stood near the entrance, arms crossed. For years, Carter had bullied them. Now, he was just another man on the outside. Carter pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he scrolled through his contacts, his lawyer, his business partners. Somebody had to fix this. He called his corporate connection. The line rang once, twice. Then, "Carter? What the hell did you do?" It was Douglas Reed, one of the board members of the hotel chain. Carter's voice cracked. "Douglas, listen, there's been a mistake. O'Neill, he's making a scene. He's trying to destroy me." Silence. Then, a sigh. "No, Carter. You destroyed yourself." Carter's stomach dropped. Douglas continued, his voice cold. "You think we didn't know about the complaints? The high turnover rate? The missing funds?" Carter swallowed hard. Douglas cut him off. "We looked the other way because the hotel was making money. But now?" Carter clenched his fists. "Douglas, please. We can fix this." "No, Carter, you don't understand. It's over. You're fired. Effective immediately." Carter's knees almost buckled. Fired from his own hotel. Carter's phone buzzed again. He glanced down. A notification from social media. His name was trending. His face plastered across the internet. Shaq had posted the hidden camera footage. Millions of views, thousands of comments. One headline stood out: "Corrupt hotel manager caught on tape. Shaquille O'Neal exposes the truth." Carter's vision blurred. His head pounded. This wasn't just firing. This was public humiliation. His phone rang again. His wife. His jaw tightened. He let it ring. He already knew what she was going to say. The doors of the hotel swung open. Shaq stepped outside. Carter froze. The 7 feet 1 inch legend towered over him, arms crossed. For the first time, Carter felt small. Shaq's voice was calm, measured, deadly serious. "I gave you a chance to explain yourself. You had nothing." Carter's hand shook. "Please, Mr. O'Neill, let's talk." Shaq's face didn't change. "There's nothing left to say." Carter glanced around. The staff, watching from inside. The guests, shaking their heads. He had spent years making people feel powerless. Now, he was the powerless one. Shaq turned to security. "Make sure he doesn't step foot in this hotel again." Carter flinched. "No! Wait! Please!" But the security guards didn't hesitate. They grabbed him again, leading him farther away from the entrance. Carter struggled. "This isn't fair." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Fair?" He gestured toward Luis, Sophia, Maria, every worker Carter had mistreated. "Fair is finally happening." Carter's breath hitched. The realization hit him like a train. There was no coming back from this. The security guards released him near the curb. A few hotel guests snapped pictures. A man in a suit walked by, whispering to his companion, "That's him, the guy Shaq fired." A woman at the valet stand laughed. "Couldn't have happened to a better guy." Carter's face burned. He had once owned this hotel. Now, he was nobody. His car pulled up. The valet hesitated. "Sir, should I still call you Mr. Carter?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Carter snatched the keys, his face twisted in anger. He got in, and as he sped away, tires screeching, he realized this wasn't just the end of his job. It was the end of his entire life as he knew it. As Carter's car disappeared into the city, Luis turned to Shaq. The old janitor grinned. "That was the best thing I've ever seen." Shaq chuckled. He had it coming. Sophia clapped her hands. "So, who's the new manager?" Shaq smirked. "I have a few ideas." Luis raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Someone who actually respects the workers?" Shaq nodded. "Damn right." The lobby felt different, lighter. For years, Carter's presence poisoned this place. Now, it was finally free. Shaq patted Luis on the back. Get some rest, man. No more unpaid overtime. Luis grinned. Music to my ears. Sophia laughed. So, Shaq, does this mean you're retiring as a janitor? Shaq grabbed a mop. Nope. The staff burst into laughter. A new chapter had begun. And this time, everyone was winning. The storm was over. For the first time in years, the hotel felt alive. The tension that had lingered in the air, the fear, the anxiety, the dread, was gone. And in its place, relief, hope, change. Shaq stood in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by the staff. Luis, Sophia, the janitors, the housekeepers, the kitchen crew. All of them looking at him not just as a boss, but as someone who finally saw them. They had spent years being ignored. Today, they mattered. Shaq cleared his throat. All right, y'all. First things first. He glanced around at the team, tired but smiling. Let's talk about what's going to change. Everyone leaned in. Luis crossed his arms. You mean, besides Carter being gone? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Shaq grinned. Oh, that's just the beginning. Then he got serious. No more unpaid overtime. No more stolen tips. No more fear of losing your job just because someone's having a bad day. Heads nodded, eyes widened. For the first time, they believed it. Shaq turned to Luis. The old janitor stood tall, but Shaq could see the years of exhaustion in his posture. Luis, Shaq said, how long you been working here? Luis straightened. 15 years, boss. Shaq folded his arms. And in 15 years, how many raises you got? Silence. Luis looked down. None. Murmurs spread through the staff. Shaq shook his head. That ends today. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to HR. Then he looked back at Luis. Check your next paycheck. You'll see a 30% raise. Luis's mouth fell open. What? The staff gasped. Luis blinked rapidly. His hands trembled. You serious? Shaq nodded. Dead serious. Luis rubbed his eyes. He wasn't about to cry in front of everyone. But man, it was close. Shaq turned to Sophia. She had been one of the bravest voices against Carter. She had fought to protect her team, even when it put her own job at risk. Shaq respected that. Sophia, he said, how would you like to be the new housekeeping supervisor? Sophia froze. Wait, me? Shaq nodded. You know this hotel better than anyone, and you care about your team. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. Sophia covered her mouth, eyes wide. I don't know what to say. Luis nudged her. Say yes, dummy. Laughter filled the room. Sophia looked at Shaq. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. Shaq grinned. Then it's yours. The staff cheered. For the first time, promotions weren't just for corporate favorites. They were for the people who actually deserved them. Shaq clapped his hands. All right, next order of business, tips. The room went quiet. Every worker there knew how much money Carter had stolen from them. Shaq pointed at the front desk. Guests leave tips, right? The receptionist nodded. Yeah, but Carter always... Shaq cut him off. Yeah, well, Carter's gone. So from now on, tips go directly to the people who earn them. A housekeeper raised her hand. Even for us? Shaq nodded. Especially for you. A dishwasher frowned. But how do we know they won't disappear? Shaq pulled out his phone. We're installing a digital system. Every tip left by guests will be recorded. You'll get a direct deposit. No middleman. No funny business. The staff exchanged glances. They had never had a system that protected them. Now? They finally did. Now, Shaq said, we need a new general manager. Luis raised an eyebrow. Got anyone in mind? Shaq smirked. Yeah, someone who actually respects employees. He looked toward the entrance. The doors swung open. A tall woman in a sleek blazer walked in. Did I hear there's a job opening? The staff whispered. It was Jamie Reynolds, a respected hotel manager who had built a reputation for treating employees like family. Shaq extended a hand. Welcome to the team. Jamie shook it. Glad to be here. The staff breathed a collective sigh of relief. For the first time in years, they had a boss they could trust. As the meeting ended, the energy in the hotel felt different, lighter, happier. Shaq looked around, taking it all in. Louise and Sophia were grinning. The housekeepers were chatting freely. The front desk staff laughed. The kitchen crew joked with each other. This was no longer Carter's hotel. It was theirs. Before leaving, Shaq turned back to the staff. One last thing. Everyone looked at him. He grinned. This isn't a one-time fix. If anyone ever disrespects you like Carter did, you come straight to me. Sophia raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do we reach a billionaire like you? Shaq smirked. Easy. He handed her a business card. At the bottom, in bold letters, it said, Shaq's direct line. The staff burst into laughter. Shaq winked. Trust me, I'll pick up. As Shaq walked toward the exit, he looked back one last time. The staff stood together, stronger, happier. This was their hotel now. And from this day forward, it would be a place where everyone was treated with respect. The hotel was different now. The air was lighter. The fear was gone. But outside these walls, the real impact was just beginning. Shaq sat in his office, scrolling through his phone. The video had been uploaded just an hour ago. It was already blowing up. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People were furious at what they saw. A hotel manager stealing tips, abusing workers, and firing employees for no reason. But they were even more amazed at what happened next. Shaq stepping in, revealing his identity and firing Carter on the spot. News outlets were picking it up. Talk shows were already reaching out. The internet was calling it one of the most satisfying takedowns ever caught on camera. But for Shaq, this was never about going viral. It was about sending a message. Twitter was on fire. Shaq just pulled the greatest undercover boss move of all time. This is how you treat employees with respect. Shaq is a real one. That manager got what he deserved. You can tell a lot about someone by how they treat people who serve them. Comment sections flooded with support. Workers from hotels, restaurants, and service jobs shared their own horror stories of bad bosses. A conversation had started, and Shaq knew exactly what to do next. The next morning, Shaq appeared on Good Morning America. The host smiled as the clip rolled on screen. Shaq, this might be one of the most talked about videos of the year. Why did you do it? Shaq leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Because I've been around great people my whole life. Coaches, trainers, teammates. And you know what they all had in common? Respect. Doesn't matter if you're the CEO or the janitor. Everybody deserves to be treated like a person. The host nodded. So what happens now? Shaq didn't hesitate. We make sure it never happens again. Not just in my hotels, but everywhere. Shaq knew one viral moment wasn't enough. Real change needed action. Within a week, he announced new policies across all his businesses. A few days later, Shaq walked back into the hotel. This time, no disguise, no hidden cameras, just a boss checking in. Sophia saw him first. You're back, Shaq grinned. Told you I would be. Luis shook his head, smiling. Boss, you know you don't have to check on us every week, right? Shaq smirked. I know, but I like the food here. Laughter filled the lobby. Shaq looked around. The staff was happy. The hotel was thriving. This was what real leadership looked like. And it all started with one undercover shift.